Hello and welcome to Elevating Voices. I'm your host, Joelle Tamraz, and today my guest is Stewart Home, author of Fascist Yoga. Let me see if I can get the subtitle. Grifters, Occultists, White Supremacists, and the New Order in Wellness. I practiced that, Stewart.
Yeah, we had a lot of discussion with publisher over the exact title, and it kept changing around, and we ended up with a very good one, I think.
Yes, it covers a lot of what you're talking about in the book.
Exactly. So yeah, no, at one point it was called Gurus of Deceit. I had Fascist and Yoga in the original title, but it wasn't Fascist Yoga. And then one editor wanted to change it to Gurus of Deceit. Then the sales people said, no, it has to have Fascism and Yoga in the title.
That's so
yeah.
interesting. Yeah, they both would have fit your book.
Yeah. I think because, the original idea was to write a book about, well, effectively yoga grifters. And obviously fascism also makes up a good portion of it because fascists are also grifters. So you've got a double grift going on with the politics and the yoga. But yeah, I think we made the right decision in the end. But there was endless discussion about title and which word should be in and which word should be out. I was horrified when someone changed the title so that it had fascism in the main title and the subtitle. It's like, you can't possibly do that. It looks like I don't know how to write.
Yeah. So when you said that it was about guru grifters, were there other gurus in there, or did it always cover this set of people?
It was always going to be this set of people, but I mean, obviously, I think it divides into three sections. So the middle section is the literal fascist yoga. The earlier section is kind of precursors to fascist yoga, and after the defeat of the Axis powers in the Second World War, fascism isn't popular. So whether people were drawn to fascism or not, they generally didn't talk it up. So I think the last figure I deal with, Frank Rudolph Young, is ideologically very close to fascism, but he certainly doesn't declare himself to be such. But he's basically a grifter in the occult and physical development world, got into yoga, did his first book on yoga for men, then obviously realized that wasn't such a good idea to half his potential market. And so in his later yoga books, his exercises make men muscular and slenderize women, somehow with the same exercise.
Of course.
Of course, but
that's the magic of yoga, isn't it?
It is indeed. And also, if you follow his instructions, he claims that he expected to live for 330 years or more, and that you can too, except that he went senile and died at 91. So not bad.
Yeah. It's interesting. I do remember the figure of 300 years from your book, and the grifting yogi that I was married to also said that 300 years is a very respectable old age, and it justified him being so much older than me because it was just a blip in time, given that he would live to be 300.
Exactly. Yeah. In terms of percentage, if you live to be 300 as well, the age difference would kind of go down percentage-wise enormously. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because some of the figures like Harvey Day claim that basically you can be immortal if you want to, and yogis choose to die. And other people make more modest estimates that if you follow my yoga system, you'll live to be 100. But that kind of obsession with longevity is certainly a selling point for a lot of grifter yogis.
It's a very powerful selling point. Just as you were saying that Sadhguru, one of the common yoga gurus now out of India, he says that his wife chose to leave her body. And there's a lot of evidence that it happened very differently from that. Not to get us on a sidetrack that's not, so central to your book. And then living to be 100, Deepak Chopra and many others saying that's what we should all be aiming for.
I mean, you see similar things with martial arts, and particularly the Japanese. A lot of them were attracted to kind of right-wing politics. But Yeshiva, who is the credited as the founder of Aikido, but there's arguments about it. You hear stories about his disciples discussing kind of putting him in a sitting position after he died, so it looked like he'd chosen to die. Again, the same thing.
That. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so it cuts across other disciples, and again, obviously, without knocking the entire system, things like, the discussion of ki or chi, kind of moving it within the body and the kind of mystical abilities it's supposed to provide. And when you see those demonstrations of students who are trained to fall for their master when they're knocked down without even being touched from a distance, because the energy is supposedly coming out of the master's hand so fiercely. I mean, it's all the same kind of cons, and probably it attracts with the gender divide in exercise, which has been there certainly since the 19th century. So the martial arts and that kind of bullshit attracts men more, and yoga women. I mean, it's obviously not exclusive, but that gendered that way, but that's the way it happens. And the bullshit is the same though.
Yeah, you mentioned that there's an essentialism. I like that phrase, and early on in your introduction, between that bridges fascism to yoga, this idea that we can, if we just manage to reach this amazing essence, then it kind of fixes everything, and it trumps reason and all the difficult problems of argumenting, all the things that would be a bit more complex, you can reduce down to this essence, like chi or universal consciousness or whatever,
or prana, or orgones, if you are Reichian. It's the same idea of this energy, this universal energy. In fact, that was probably the first one I came across, because I used to listen to Hawkwind when I was a kid, so they had the song Orgone Accumulator.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't think when I saw Richard Hittleman on TV, I was really taking in if he was talking about prana, I wasn't paying any attention, because we didn't have many channels in the UK when I was a kid. So he'd just be on because it was too wet to run around the street.
Yeah. Did he emphasize? Now, that is one of the figures from your book that I'd heard of, but not watched. Did he emphasize very much the physical aspect of yoga?
No, he saw the physical aspect as a way of drawing people into the religious beliefs, and he was essentially a creationist. I mean, he grew up within the Judaistic religion, but switched to kind of Hindu. It isn't clear where he learned his yoga at all. He wouldn't let on, but it may have been from a book. But he denied the theory of evolution and was very heavily anti-scientific, anti-science. But he was where I first encountered yoga, which was again why I didn't particularly think of it as Indian, because he had the TV series in the States and then had the UK TV series, and it was on just when I came home from school. So you stick the black and white TVs then, although they did broadcast in colour, didn't have a colour TV. Stick the black and white TV on, and there he'd be talking nonsense. But so I thought it was some kind of American salesperson thing, because I was never paying a lot of attention because it wasn't that interesting. Or he always had trained dancers in leotards demonstrate the techniques, who looked a lot better than he did. But that's a thing that right from Pierre Bernard at the beginning of the 20th century, his wife Blanche de Vise was a dancer, and you see it also with all sorts of other figures as well, that they get dancers to demonstrate. So the grace comes from dance training, not from yoga.
Yeah, and that's persisted. At least when I had a yoga school in Paris, and I'm sure in other places in the world, dancers reconvert very easily and gracefully into yoga teachers, much to the approval of their students, who are just think, I want to be as beautiful and as graceful as this teacher. And it does work, this magnetic power that has very little to do with yoga, and a lot more to do with just plain old looks and grace and training.
I mean, it is training for whatever you want to do, so that's the secret, is just the physical exercise. There's no mystical energies going anywhere.
Yeah, you can tell us about that, right? Because what took you can you tell us what initially brought you in contact with the world of yoga?
Well, I used to go to a local gym in South Islington, and I did weightlifting and boxing, as one does, whatever your interests are. And because I write fiction, and to kind of have a more performative aspect to the presentation of my novels, I didn't like people reading from books and mumbling into a page as they did so. I learned to recite from memory, and I'd done ventriloquism, which I have a natural talent for, because I don't move my mouth a lot when I talk, and I have a stone face. And then I thought I could do it standing on my head. It came out of a discussion where someone was talking about how easy or difficult it was to read in public, and I said I could do it standing on my head, and I thought, well, let's literalize that. So I noticed that after the boxing class, there was a yoga class. I checked out that they taught headstands, and I went and got a very poor reception because the students queuing up to come into the exercise studio had seen I was already in there doing boxing through the window, so I just stayed in. And they thought someone who did boxing shouldn't do yoga. And asked the teacher to stop me doing yoga, which she couldn't do because I had a gym membership which entitled you to go to whatever classes you wanted. So she very sensibly said I was entitled to go, and then came out with this line about how I'd have got my anger out with boxing, so therefore I was in a proper state to do yoga. But yeah, I got a very cold reception from some of the yogis, which is something I've come across again and again. Some of the although I met perfectly nice people in the yoga classes, some of the most unpleasant people I've ever met, I also met through going to the yoga classes. Noticeably more unpleasant than anyone doing any other sport I came across. Not that there weren't people who are unpleasant doing other things like boxing or weightlifting, but just there were a lot less of them.
So, and it's so interesting that you say that. I think is it because they're drawn to self-improvement? They need yoga more than others to correct that nastiness or a certain arrogance that comes. I feel one of the things I observed is that not so much in the students that came to our school, because they were just kind of regular people in the neighborhood, based on where we were in Paris, professionals. And it was the kind of school where the classes were more expensive than your local gym, so people had to actually really want to do it. And
yeah,
I don't think they were nasty, but I think sometimes among some teachers, not all, you get a particular kind of hubris about the yoga that makes them a little different.
Yeah, well, I think the thing was that they thought they had some kind of superior spiritual perspective on life than everyone else, and I had no spiritual perspective and was quite happy to say so, because I prefer to take a more scientific attitude to understanding the world. But yeah, I mean, some of the teachers were very nice, some of them were very cooky, and I particularly disliked those involved with the British wheel of yoga. I found them particularly obnoxious, and also the one Iyengar teacher I had tried was really unpleasant. But it was a mixed bag. But I always found all the chakras and the energy stuff annoying, just as I do if I go to a martial arts class, and not helpful to what I was doing.
Yeah, it's great that you kept that discerning mind through it all. And I think we're all different. Also depends a little bit, I guess, on what age you are when you get involved with these things, when you're quite young and impressionable and your parent was already in it. And
Yeah.
I felt like I absolutely needed to be in it, and even to believe it, because if mom did, that there was no way I was going to be lagging behind. So you did get quite impressionable, and you think, am I missing something? I feel like there is this element of I'm missing something in the real world, therefore it must be in this other place, the mystical world.
Yeah, no, I mean, my mother had a lot of interest in stuff like that, and was involved with Divine Light Mission. But she also took enough drugs for the entire family for several generations, which is why she overdosed when she was 35, and why I've never felt any. A long time ago,
Yeah,
1979.
but I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I wish he was still alive, but yeah, I guess it depends on your relationships as well. But in some ways, she was, I think she was very impressive in all sorts of ways, and I'm very proud of her and a lot of things that she did. But yeah, the spiritual belief was not something I wanted to ever go along with. So yeah, and also I started yoga in my 40s, which is
Yeah, you're in a different place, right? Than
yeah,
in your late teens. My
exactly.
introduction was through transcendental meditation at the age of 18. And you're you're in that transition year. I had just finished secondary school, I was about to enter Harvard, and it was just this moment. And transcendental meditation is taught as this very vanilla, scientific
Yeah,
teaching, and it's anything but. It's like anything else. It's a formula, but it's also a formula that's meant to take you in, because once you accept that the formula works, because you're told that it works, so you accept that it works, then you believe in the Maharishi, and there are links, just like in any other kind of spiritual yoga.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't, because I went to gym yoga, I tried a few other classes just out of interest to find out what it was about. But because it was a big gym and they had one or two yoga classes every day and they had substitute teachers, you could try pretty much every style, apart from aerial yoga, which I went to the London School of Dance across the road to try, and found out that it mainly trained strippers in pole dancing. So they had a very different vibe from a regular yoga studio. But yeah, I mean, I didn't go to places where you did meditation, and I was always very dubious of a lot of the breathing exercises, because they were essentially asking you to hyperventilate, which would then make you susceptible to manipulation, because they usually talk
Yeah.
bullshit having got you to hyperventilate.
Yeah. Yeah. So how long did it take you to learn, to achieve your goal of the headstand?
It took a few months, and the instructor who I'd gone to first, although I tried others, she was very surprised and asked me how I'd learned it so quickly. And I just said, well, I practiced at home every day until I could do it. I wasn't taught in a very good way. I mean, they just taught you to kick up, which, I've got more efficient ways of getting a headstand now. But, when I explained that I did it because I wanted to recite standing on my head, she said, but you can't do that, because I wanted to read from my book standing on my head. I said, well, too late. I've done it. I did it in Paris, then I did it in Berlin. I'm about to do it in London. Although, my technique was pretty rough, because they taught a basket, and I prefer the tripod anyway. But they just taught you to kick up in the classes I went to, rather than kind of getting your knees kind of against your body and then lifting the legs, which is a lot more controlled and also easier to do from a tripod than a basket, depending on your flexibility. But yeah, I mean, but all the teachers who taught headstand in the gym seemed to teach it that way. I never came across anyone teaching it any other way for a long time.
Other than the yoga people.
The yoga people were just teaching it that way. I mean, if there'd been gymnastics people that with gymnastics training, they'd have taught a tripod, which I would have preferred.
Yes,
So
I mean, when I first took my very first physical yoga class, again around the age of 18, I had remembered quite a few of the positions from school, but it
yeah,
wasn't called yoga. The bridge, and as you say, the headstand. From gymnastics, the bridge, a few other splits. None of these things were specifically yoga, and yet we did them at school. And then you get a yoga class, and they're kind of strung together as one discipline.
yeah. I mean, we didn't do in our PE. We just mainly ran around and had a hard ball kicked at us until it hit us. Then we were out, and we had to wait till everyone was out and run around again, or play soccer. That's pretty much all we did.
I guess they weren't teaching boys stretching.
No, they didn't teach any stretching.
I don't know if they taught girl stretching, but I didn't learn it either in Paris. I left Paris at the age of 9 and went to New York, and there, gradually over the years, they would teach you stretching in whatever PE class. And not as just as discrete movements, and then you find in yoga.
No, we did. I mean, we didn't do that. We just did soccer, cross country running, and running around the gym hall while a ball was kicked at us. That was it. So yeah.
Then how did you go from the headstand to this book? There's quite a what got you investigating? Because there's so much in your book.
I think I'm always curious about any subject. So always been curious about con men, and used to like to read up on that stuff as a kid. Okay. So I realized a lot of bullshit was being talked in the classes, and didn't necessarily believe that the stories I was hearing were real. So that all this, it's a 5,000-year-old tradition. I mean, the way the classes were taught didn't strike me as something that would have been done 5,000 years ago. The notions of pedagogy were obviously modern.
Yes.
So I just started doubting a lot of what I was hearing and being told in the classes. So I'd go and read it up just for my own satisfaction. So, I came across the arguments about the physical yoga essentially being Western gymnastics, and being kind of mixed with the Hindu fairy dust in the 1920s and 30s. Just going through and reading different books. And then in 2016, I was reading the paper, as I often do, I think on a Sunday, and I saw a piece with a picture of a guy with a Make America Great Again hat on his knee as he did the half lotus in a kind of meditation pose. and a Celtic cross, which is, not traditionally a fascist symbol, but has been appropriated by fascists. And a story about how this guy was kind of counterintuitive because he was into yoga and tarot and spirituality, and yet he was a fascist. But because I'd come across what you can call countercultural fascism through music and been involved in kind of anti-fascist stuff, right from the 70s, I'd go on the anti-Nazi League and Rock Against Racism protests, just because I dislike the National Front, who were dislike racism, the big fascist party in the UK in the 70s, so we'd be protesting against them. And obviously they had their own kind of music scene and a kind of countercultural fascism. So I thought, where you see one person like this isn't counterintuitive, it actually makes sense of other things that I know about. There will be more. So then I went to look for them and found them very quickly. Francis Yates Young and Jeff C. Fuller being the kind of go-to ones. And then going back and looking at Rijeka, which people often call Fiume, using the Italian name for the town. But the name you choose to use says something about your politics. So I prefer to say Rijeka, just as I say Derry, and not the other name for the town in the north of Ireland, which is the north of Ireland and not what it's called by the UK media. But I have Irish heritage, is some of where that's coming from. So I just went through looking at that material, and I just went to try and find, how did this stuff spread, and look for who was influential, which in the earlier part of the 20th century, and even when I was a kid in the 70s, I was interested in martial arts, but often you couldn't find someone who taught whatever martial art you were interested in, but you could go in the local branch of W.H. Smith's or whatever and find an imported American book that supposedly taught you how to fight with that style of martial arts. I mean, when I got older, I learned that often they were highly inaccurate, and the authors didn't actually know what they were talking about in terms of authentically teaching different martial arts that interested me. But that, again, going back with yoga, people would get the books, so I just chased up through the libraries. I always used the British Library for years and years, decades, but also just ordering stuff online when it used to be very cheap. You'd basically buy the books for a penny and pay £2.80 postage because a lot of the stuff was American and wasn't available in the British Library. So yeah, just following it through and looking for stuff and searching through lists, looking through bibliographies, trying to find who had an impact. And obviously we mentioned Francis Yates Brown, who was a follower of Pierre Bernard in terms of magazines. He got a lot of newspaper coverage in the 30s. His book didn't sell particularly well on yoga, Yoga Explained. And then also Pierre Bernard's nephew, Theus Bernard, again, did books about yoga, but also got an enormous amount of press coverage for both of them. Their claims about how they learned yoga and where they learned it have been disproved by academic research, so I didn't have to do that. But it was just going through the material. And some of it, Frank Rudolph Young really fascinated me because he was such a con man. So when I actually started turning it into a book, his chapter was the first one I wrote. But then when I got onto the guy who I knew as Desmond Dunn, who I had some books by, and who had run a mail order yoga course, I had to figure out who his name was, which is often not that difficult because National Library, like British Library or Bodleian in Oxford, will kind of have an author name against a pseudonym, and you kind of can go and check that out. But anyway, I identified him as James Lee Richardson. Where I found him written about by yoga academics, they hadn't actually identified who he was, which I couldn't understand. He was James Lee Richardson, and then I was able to identify him as the author of as James Lee, who'd been misidentified as someone else by various people. But now it's very easy to do a lot of research online, but I have trawled through kind of birth certificates and stuff in the old archival form when I was younger, when you couldn't just go on Ancestry and search birth records and marriage records. So because of in the first James Lee book, there's a dedication to M, Kemp, who's his fiance, and a year later I found the marriage, plus where his businesses were run from in New Malden. I was able to tie everything together. And I do mostly have that information in the book, although the editor thought, I went overboard on my interest in proving points, so some of the stuff was removed. But, also for me, that was very interesting because he was born and based in New Malden, which is a little further out from central London than where I was born in Wimbledon. But as a child, it's somewhere I used to go. And the fact that he had this massive international mail order course run from addresses in New Malden, which I've visited both of them now, he shifted, but both were strangely next to churches. Which obviously attracted him because, obviously people made the argument that often churches are on pagan sites, and if you're interested in ley lines, which I don't believe in, you kind of line up a load of things on a straight line which all have values, and churches would be included as potential pagan sites, and there you have your ley line. It's just a series of things. So he he sold courses, mail order courses, as well as yoga on how to do palmistry and tarot and all the usual astrology, of course, all the usual bullshit. Yeah, which again, when I was even looking at Indian yogis, quite a few of them would have books on yoga and books on astrology or related subjects.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they would probably say they both stem from some aspect of, they tie it back to Hinduism as well, which, I'm sure has a tenuous link. I mean, I think the Vedic religion is something different again, and then you have local religions, but it's all kind of massed together. When I've tried to speak a little bit about yoga's modern origins, invariably someone will come and take offense and say that that's the yoga in the West, but the yoga in India is really not about the posture. Someone will explain it's about something else. And when you ask them what that other thing else is, it becomes a little bit much more vague.
Yeah, and I mean, also with I saw that with the reviews because the book was published by an Indian publisher as well.
Okay.
And I was expecting to get some quite bad reviews, but mostly the reviews were, well, this is about Westerners corrupting our yoga.
Interesting. Yeah.
And not really taking on board. It was from there's not a big leap to thinking that the Indian yoga isn't so fantastic either.
It's interesting how there in India, I think it's definitely taken a political turn, with the ruling party, and, yoga being used as soft power. And you'll get Indians who are, very attached to their democracy and democratic ideals, and indeed non-Hindu Indians welcoming, the reality that actually yoga is not this essential part of India. It's just one thing that's been picked up and popularized.
No, exactly. And my publisher in India specializes in Dalit literature and is very critical of the caste system. So I think he picked up the book for precisely that reason, that it fitted in with his more democratic political agenda.
Yes. So how have been the receptions to the book? What when you speak about it, or what kind of feedback have you received?
I was actually surprised by how positive most of it was, even from a lot of yoga people saying, particularly, I have a few friends who were yoga teachers of Pakistani origin, and they were saying it really explained the racism. They, in fact, one of them was born in Pakistan and she came over here later, Sasha. So she did a lot of the talks with me. And she was like super supportive, saying, "Oh, this just totally explains the racism I experienced trying to teach in London yoga studios." So, but also not necessarily people who'd had experienced problems with racism, although, I know quite a few who have. People, just saying, yeah, we need to know about the history and kind of understand what it is, but I'm still going to do my they'll call it yoga. And then I'll have people, criticize me because they'll see me in the gym doing what they think is yoga, which I think is a hand balance. It might be a planche, but they think it's a peacock.
Oh,
You're doing peacock. No, I'm doing a planche. You're doing yoga. No, I'm doing gymnastics.
Well, the terminology has shifted. You'll be in another kind of class and people will say child pose or down dog and think nothing of it and not think they're really talking about yoga. So there is a bit of a
Yeah.
terminology has seeped into other disciplines.
Yeah. But more generally, I mean, it was, I was surprised by the amount of press coverage it had. I'd had with some of my books, the same amount of kind of large British newspapers covering it, although obviously they're not as large as they used to be in the old days when it was print more than online. But also, El País and El Mundo and Die Welt, German, Spanish, Greek,
Oh.
Latin American outlets covering the book and wanting interviews and to kind of send photographers to take pictures. And I've never had that happen when the book hasn't been translated into the local language.
Oh, it
But
hasn't been.
no,
Have you
not
had
yet.
any
No,
translations yet?
no, because the Indian edition is in English. There's Spanish rights, German rights sold, Portuguese. I'm trying to remember what else. Anyway, so yeah, there's rights sold, but it takes a while to translate and get the book out. So for me, it was really surprising to have Spanish and German language and Greek language press, desperate to cover me when the book wasn't available in the language, even though it will be available down the line, but they couldn't wait. So that was quite
The link
surprising.
you made in 2016, obviously other people noticed and then you excavated it and brought the book out. So it filled that need to understand why are we juxtaposing these things,
Yeah.
fascism and yoga. I mean, I've recorded lots of videos on yoga, but coming out and saying the word fascist yoga in a video just garnered a lot of attention because I think people are researching fascism more now. So it's bringing
Yeah.
things together.
I researched fascism I did a kind of loose trilogy as my second, third, and fourth books, novels. So, I'd done a lot of research into fascism there, so I didn't have a lot of catching up to do on that line. I mean, in terms of to go back to reception of this particular book, there was a kind of more minority response of kind of yoga people who were completely offended and, would then write a piece about how I didn't know anything because obviously sun salutations were intrinsically Indian, so how could I say it was Western? But if you read the book, I talk about the introduction of sun salutation to modern postural practice in the middle of the 20th century and about the kind of different times at which different writers bring it in. So I talk about how Harvey Day brought it in long before Indra Devi, for example. And again, people have said things like, oh, the book's called Fascist Yoga, but I'm completely wrong because all I prove is that Indra Devi is a kind of bourgeois snob and not that she's a fascist. But I don't set out to prove she's a fascist if you actually read the book closely. I don't say she's a fascist, so they're not. But I think they're so offended by the idea that you could criticize yoga that they're going to have a problem with the book. But the arguments didn't seem to me to hold together and didn't seem worth engaging with them as reviews.
Yeah, no, one of the aspects of your book that for me differentiate itself from so many others that I've read, and that too, there are few books that are really willing to take a critical stance on yoga. I had read Mark Simpleton's book when it came out, I think around 2010 or so quite a
Yeah.
while. And that was interesting because a lot of people have wondered about the history. Even some of the yoga adepts think these postures weren't in the original text. Hardly any of them were. We can split hairs and say, well, maybe this one was. Or when I say original, I don't mean, from the Middle Ages, let's say, or older texts than the last century. But I felt that at the end, Mark Simpleton is still trying to reconcile in his mind. There's something that doesn't work. He wants to still keep up with the yoga myth, but say that it's actually more recent. You could feel that tension. Whereas I think yours is, I don't know if you read any other book that really has come down and said, no, we've got a fundamental issue here in how we're presenting this discipline. And the whole idea that the whole thing is a sham is actually, I think, very hard for people to take on board. At least that's my
No,
theory.
because I mean, obviously I read the conspirituality book, aware of the podcast, although I'm not a fan of podcasts. No, I'd rather read a book and have the data in front of me and can focus on what I want to know. But again, conspirituality took on board the kind of singleton perspective and was critical of fascist elements within yoga, but again wanted to preserve it and wanted to preserve that kind of spirituality. So I did, because I had friends really recommending that to me because they knew of my kind of positions on yoga, and I found it was fine as far as it went, but it didn't go as far as I wanted it to go, basically.
Yeah, I hear that. I've only listened to a few, or where it falls down as well for me is there's too much argumentation around it, and sometimes I miss the actual point that they're trying to make. Not always, but sometimes.
Yeah. And the other, for me, as someone born and living in London, it has a very American perspective, which there's nothing wrong with. I have a very London perspective,
Yeah.
But I wanted something with a more European angle, dealing with stuff that they weren't dealing with, probably because it was European. So trying to bring some of that up.
So at what point did you feel like yoga wasn't for you? I mean, was it right away when you went to the gym and after a few months you learned how to do a headstand, which was your goal, or was it at the end of writing this book? I'm just wondering about your whole journey with the debunking aspect of it.
No, I think it was, it was very obvious to me from the first lesson that I wasn't interested in the nonsense about chakras and energy that I was hearing. But in terms of the exercise, I think as I read up more sports sites and a lot of, the backbending was contraindicative. And I still have, I'm old enough and I'll stand my ground, and I still go to some martial arts classes. And when in the warm-ups they ask you to do a full neck roll, I won't do it because I've read sports science and it's contraindicative. I'll do a half neck roll or I'll nod my head up and down or go to the left and right, but I'm not going to do a full neck roll. Even though there's nothing wrong with my neck, and then they assume that there must be something wrong with my neck, which is why I'm not doing a full neck roll. But find that in martial arts classes and in yoga classes. So there were certain exercises I didn't want to do, and I would choose not to do them. And the other thing that would annoy not just yoga teachers, but teachers who I think lack self-confidence in a lot of ways, was when you modified their exercises, which generally I'd be modifying them to make them harder, which seemed to annoy them in a way that modifying them to make them easier didn't.
That's interesting. Can you give an example?
I'm trying to think because it's a long time since I was going to those classes. It was probably more evident if you went to Pilates and yoga because it was more easy ways of.
Oh, Pilates, yes.
Yeah.
Pilates is not quite as dogmatic and doesn't claim to be spiritual.
No. I mean, I'd still go to. I'm friends with a very good Pilates teacher, and I still occasionally go to her classes. But I wouldn't do yoga. But and she doesn't have a problem with me modifying things because she knows I know what I'm doing. But I did experience that with. I think one of the things was I used to, because I'd done did Ashtanga and like some of the stuff like kind of jumping in and out of a headstand, a tripod headstand. If they were doing some sequence where I could throw that in, I'd throw it in, and then the yoga teacher wouldn't like it because I was doing something too flash.
I've never heard, I must admit, Stuart, I've never heard that before. I'm sure you would impress. Maybe in France it would go down better. They'd say, wow, every culture is different. But yeah, or, I'm thinking maybe they thought you would injure yourself and then they'd have a problem there. One question I wanted to ask you, why do you think there's such a pervasive cultural belief around yoga being this amazing thing? I will tell you one thing, because of my research, my own memoir, my own work, I do have that's how I came across your book. I've got a Google alert on the word yoga and just seeing what news comes up. And not statistically, but I would say 1% of the news is ever critical. And there are some, high profile stories that come out of people who've gone into cult situations that they didn't expect from yoga. Why do you think our culture here, at least in Europe and North, is so pervasively positive towards yoga?
I think it's because one journalist, which is I think why I was getting the international coverage I was getting, who don't like yoga and think it's bullshit, and maybe have a partner who's really annoying with it, can't find critical material, and two, because there's such a kind of lobbying and PR job by kind of yoga organisations, Yoga Alliance or British Wheel of Yoga. You look at the Yoga Journal, and they're just turning out positive material. And a lot of journalists are just doing their job and having to churn stuff out fast, so they're working from press releases. And now you've got AI, and so because there is little critical material, the situation of there being little gets perpetuated.
Yeah.
That's something I would hope my book would change.
Yes. Yes. I mean, if you had one message for debunking yoga, it's a bit hard to ask you for one, but what would it be?
I think it's well, just don't believe the hype, because it's not going to make you live longer. I mean, if you actually are concerned with longevity and being health span in particular, Tai Chi will do more for you, because it's all that weight shifting between the legs. Although, I do have problems with some of the energy claims around Tai Chi, or all of them. Weight training is absolutely essential when you get older to maintain muscle and bone density. And, people do yoga because it's nice and it's relatively easy. I mean, obviously, you can do gymnastics within yoga that is challenging, but it's not, you can't push yourself. And, I've had this argument with a Filipino yoga teacher I know from Manila. And, I was just saying, just do some deadlifts and squats with heavy weights, because there's no way with the yoga you're doing that you can build your legs up. And she wanted to build her legs up, but she didn't want to do, lift weights to do it. But that's the obvious way. I don't understand it. Any system has its limitations. And, a lot of the criticisms you can level against yoga can be, for example, bodybuilding and weight training are also associated with white supremacy in the early part of the 20th century. But they haven't hung on to the kind of residues in the same way, I'd say, as yoga, and the kind of bullshit, and they're run on a more scientific basis now. But yeah, don't believe the hype, and don't think it's the best exercise to maintain health, because it clearly isn't. But any exercise has health benefits. So if you're not going to do anything doing what you might think of as yoga, strip it of the spiritual elements and do the exercises, it will keep you healthier than doing nothing. But if you're actually concerned about maximizing results and minimizing the time you spend on stuff, other systems are superior. But you need to do some cardio as well. But the focus on stretching is not good. The over focus on stretching.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's a great message. Thank you, Stewart. I did injure myself in yoga and in nothing else, so I can definitely corroborate what you said there, thinking that I just needed to do that split because I would be superior to whatever else, and then you end up hurting yourself. There is definitely a hierarchy I don't appreciate in yoga classes, as in the more flexible you are, the more closer you are to enlightenment, which makes absolutely no sense either. But
No,
there is
no.
this
And
tendency.
I can have that temptation to think, well, I just need to add 1 more kilo to that weight.
You mean in your weightlifting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you see a similar mentality, but I think there's a certain more amount of sense with it,
Yeah.
because you're looking at where you go to failure and what's your 1 rep max. But
Yes.
you need to push yourself to get the result, but you also have to do it sensibly and
Definitely.
with very good form. But I don't see what result you get from being able to do the splits. I've never been able to do it. I've always been able to get in lotus position since I saw Richard Hittleman on TV. It's like, oh, what's that? Oh, okay.
That's
But
right. We can all.
for functional everyday life, what's being able to do the splits good for? Well, if you want to be a kind of dancer or on TV, doing the splits maybe, but it's not got much use.
Yeah,
Whereas if you can lift a heavy weight, it does have uses in real life.
that's a good argument too. So what's next for you? Are you just still working within this book? Did this book lead you to think about other things that are adjacent?
There's a whole, I've always for a long time had a fascination with exercise and exercise systems.
Yeah.
So, there's a temptation to go and do something, about related things. I'm also very interested in muscular Christianity from the 19th century, which is where you had this shift from Christianity thinking, or Christians thinking sport was bad, to thinking that a healthy body, healthy mind kind of thing. But in the end, I think that's not really what I want to write about. I just want to do the next book, although I'd be interested down the line possibly writing about that. But I think the next book I'll probably do about the civic structure of the City of London, because I have different interests, and you should shift around on them. In the last couple of days, I've just been for various reasons, thinking about the literary scene in Glasgow in the 1980s and 90s, which although I lived in London, I used to go up there a lot and kind of interact with the art and literary scene. Not that this would result in a book, but yeah, there's just possibly some essays. But there's different focuses and different interests, and I love cinema, so I did one book about Bruceploitation films, which are films which riff on Bruce Lee without having Bruce Lee in them.
Okay.
And there's, the people tend to be over focused on the copyists, so you'll have actors with names like Bruce Lay and Bruce Lie and Dragon Lee who will be trying to imitate Bruce Lee moves in their movies and dressing up like Bruce Lee from his films. So I did one book on that, but there's all sorts of other areas of cinema that I'm interested in that would be tempting to write books on, but it's a bit of a specialized market. It's amazing how interested people are in yoga, and you put fascism and yoga together and
Yes.
have a big book. But I think I shouldn't be worrying about trying to follow that up with something that will appeal to the same audience. I just should get on with the things that interest me. So as I'm very interested in seeing the City of London Council abolished, I don't know if you know, but they're the last place in the UK to have the business vote, which means firms in the city get votes. So it's completely undemocratic. And the previous last place to have that system abolished in '69 was the north of Ireland, which was used to exclude Catholics from the voting register, so it was used for completely sectarian purposes. In the city, it has a different, the functions are slightly different, but actually the city was very involved with the plantation of Ulster, which was the colonisation, and the city livery companies were still part of the City of London Council. So although it promotes itself as the oldest democracy in the world, it's completely undemocratic. So that's
what period was the history you're talking about?
Ireland was Britain's first colony. So, going back to Cromwell, he committed atrocities in Ireland. So I was once talking with an Irish friend and a Jewish friend, and the Jewish friend couldn't understand our hostility to Cromwell because he had readmitted the Jews. So my Irish friend said, Cromwell is to the Irish what Hitler is to the Jews. That kind of got the message across. But, through 17th, 18th century, and then obviously you had the division of Ireland in the 20th century. So that's there. I mean, in terms of the city, it's coming on for 1,000 years old. I mean, the original Roman settlement was abandoned, and then the city was refounded in the 9th century, I think. Although I'm not so focused on the historical details, I'm more concerned about the feudal hangovers that you find now. But that's probably what I'll write my next book on. Non-fiction book. I might write a novel first.
You are prolific.
Yeah, I've been doing it a long time.
Yes, and anything that I didn't ask you about, I know we're coming up to the end of our time, and anything you'd like to add that I didn't touch on?
Maybe you should just talk a little about your journey, although you have on these things. I mean, you're still doing some yoga postures and exercises or not?
I do get that question, and I've had different answers. Some of my answers are just flippant, and I just have done enough for a lifetime. Not really. I don't call it that anymore for the reasons that I no longer see yoga as a system the way I once did. I Even while I owned a yoga studio, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I had injured my back. And at some point, that injury was a niggly injury for a few years, and then it became more serious. And after 2 or 3 months, when I was well enough to get back into exercise, I explored Pilates. And I found that Pilates really helped me strengthen my core, and that actually yoga hadn't helped me with my posture at all. And I had quite a sway posture. So Pilates was the first time I really became aware of, how good posture protects your back and how strengthening is so important. And what you've touched upon, you don't only get strong from yoga. So yeah, with my journey now, I've been here in the UK for 11 years. Before that, I lived in Paris, France, where I had the yoga studio. Before that, I lived in the US, and I've spent a lot of time in India. So I've looked at yoga from different places. And yeah, I'm not averse to going into a yoga class, but as the years go by and as I've discovered other disciplines that do deep strengthening, I don't get what I need out of yoga anymore. So I've abandoned it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, you know, I do some things that, as I said, that people think are yoga, but I say it's gymnastics. And I mean, I also found that when I tried the aerial yoga, I then went and tried aerial Pilates, and there was no difference between the two things. It was branding. It wasn't.
Yes. It's funny you say that it's linked to pole dancing because here too in the town nearby, the very first thing I tried when I moved to this country, I think out of habit, I must have looked up a yoga class uh, 11 years ago, and I found aerial yoga, but it ended up being a pole dancing studio, which is fine. And I did that for a while, but it triggered my back, and I said it's far too difficult because it actually requires so much arm strength.
Yeah,
So I've gone to, good functional exercises. I do like dance, which is something new. Dance with a beat, not like classical dance.
yeah,
Dance fitness, and as well as bar fitness, which is you're standing up, so it engages the legs and the core a lot.
yeah. No, I mean, that's for when you get older, the legs are so important. And also it's where you can build the most muscle, glutes and legs. So good to focus on. Although arm strength's fine if that's what you're into. But,
Yes, well, yes. I guess it's interesting with pole because you're hoisting yourself up with
yeah,
your arms up this object, so it's like quite very intense, and maybe it's no bad thing to develop arm
yeah,
strength as well in terms of
yeah,
lifting objects. But yes, there are probably easier ways.
yeah. But I would focus on the legs first.
Yeah.
Prioritize the legs, yeah, and core, of course. But
But
yeah,
then for me, Stuart, I spent a long, long time on the meditation aspect. If anything, that was as strong, particularly before I met my ex-husband, Arun, because of transcendental meditation. That's
yeah,
really what took me to India. And I think that is something that I finally realized it if meditation was going to do one thing for me, it was going to get me out of an abusive relationship. But since it didn't, then it really isn't. It didn't clarify my mind in the way it was supposed to. So I'm not saying that it's not helpful in any situations, but it can certainly be mind numbing versus
yeah.
um,
No, I'm
awakening.
definitely, yeah. You know, I'm definitely happy with what we call when we do sports other than yoga, being in the zone. It's just a flow state, and
Yeah,
I don't see why I need meditation when I can get a flow state from doing exercise and
yeah,
other things. I
yeah,
mean, you don't just get it from exercise. I used to. I'm not a particularly good musician. I'm pretty bad, but I used to play in quite a lot of bands. And you know, when a gig went well, you were in a flow state. You come off stage, you didn't know what you'd done.
yeah.
And you know, so why I need to sit cross-legged and try and achieve the same thing? I don't.
Yes.
Doesn't.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think it is for me when I started writing my memoir. I'd always loved writing, but that's where I found flow. And I've often
Yeah,
said I feel more flow when I just write without it, just write in flow rather than try to quiet your mind. It's
yeah.
not actually possible, but
Yeah, no, I mean, one yoga teacher I encountered really annoyed me because she'd reproduce kind of Cartesian dualism by saying, and the last adjustment is the mind, as though the mind is separate from the body. No, no, no. And she'd say it all the way through the class repeatedly.
interesting. Yeah, I think you have to come up with a saying.
But yeah,
Well,
anyway,
thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for taking the time
my
with me.
pleasure.